Today on the Fit Stoic Podcast, episode 22, Living Your Life, Not Another's. We're going to look at the responsibility that we have for our own experience, but at the same time, how to not be weird as we do that. Hello, welcome to the show. I'm Corey Samuelson. Today we're going to look at how we can go about living our lives with the very unique perspective that we have as Stoics or Stoic strength athletes. Quite often, the opinions that we hold as we look at a circumstance or see an event unfold before us is going to be very unique and quite a bit different than what someone who isn't a Stoic would interpret that event or that circumstance. This is chapter 16 of the Gymchiridion. Begin quote. Meet people at their own level. Just ensure you don't live there. How others respond to events is their own business. If you would be a friend to one in turmoil, you must sympathize and maybe even offer understanding words of solace. But make sure that you keep straight in your own mind that events are open to interpretation. If you uncritically accept the sorry view of your coworker that there's just no way to eat a healthy lunch with this schedule, you will begin to live as if they see the truth, not just an impression that there are no options. End quote. So this is an interesting one today because with the perspective of the Stoics, we become upset not because of events, but because of how we think about the events. So we cause and we create our own experience, or at least we can. Now, if we do that non-consciously, then we just allow the brain to run its programs, so to speak. So the brain will take in what our sense organs provide, what we see, what we feel and touch, what we smell, what we hear, and it will interpret those, and it'll offer that interpretation to us. So, this is okay. This is not okay. This is dangerous. This is exciting. Stuff like that. It's up to us to actually take that input and decide and choose how we're going to move forward, either with that interpretation and just allow it to, dictate our experience, or to decide, no, I want a different experience. So quite often, we will allow the opinions of others to color our own interpretation. So in the example, maybe a coworker says, there's just no time to eat a healthy lunch. And if we buy into that without looking at it critically, then we might draw the same conclusion. But we just do it out of laziness. We don't really think of any alternatives. We just accept that as, that is the truth. That's reality. When in fact, there may be limited time, but there are options in behavior. So we can actually create our own options in that same limited window for lunch. So instead of having to rush off to try to find a lunch, we can pack our own lunch. We can make healthy choices, even though there may not be a healthy alternative within a radius around our office, for example. So regardless of the circumstances, we have the ability and actually the responsibility to draw our own conclusions, to create the experience that we would prefer to have. So if I want a healthy lunch and I have a very limited window to eat a healthy lunch, then what are my options? So what I'm getting at is that we have to take responsibility for our experience and for creating the experience that we prefer. You could think of this as being the driver of the vehicle as opposed to being a passenger. So if I'm the driver, then I have the ability to chart the direction that I want to go. However, if I'm the passenger, then unless I can talk the driver into going where I would like to go, then I'm just along for the ride. And that is kind of what we do when we allow others to basically tell us what a circumstance means. Oh, this is not good. We need to get this done, and we're under a lot of stress. And they start to use all these types of words to describe an experience that they might be having, but isn't necessarily something that we need to live ourselves. Sure, the deadline's still there. Sure, there are pressures from outside, from either the customers, the buyers, the boss, to get it done, but you don't have to have a stressful experience. You can choose to remain calm, relaxed, focused, and driven to get it done, but not feel anything that you would prefer not to feel. An interesting opportunity that we have when we observe other people's lives is that we can practice experiencing something different than what they are. So sometimes if it is too much to create a new experience for ourselves, we can look at somebody else's life and we can start to make that connection that there is no inherent meaning in the events that they are experiencing, and therefore that we experience. We have the ability to create a completely different experience than the one that's dictated by, potentially or possibly, by the events themselves. So that in quotes, that stressful event, that deadline is information. It doesn't get to dictate how you feel. So you can use other people's lives as a practice ground to imagine the possibilities of creating other interpretations. Now, what I mentioned at the beginning about not being weird about this, because of our unique perspective and the way we think about life and how we experience life as Stoic strength athletes, we can sometimes come across as, I use the phrase, just plain weird. And we don't want to be weird. We want to join people in their world so that they feel understood, so that they see in us someone who supports them, who is a friend. Now, if this other person is experiencing stress or sadness or anxiety, and we come along and basically we don't feel that, and we don't show that we feel it, they may not feel much connection. They may be inspired, but they also may feel as though, who is this person? This isn't normal. So at a funeral, for example, everyone else is completely devastated because they've lost someone that they love. And then there's this individual off to the side, and they seem unaffected. Not that they're whistling a happy tune, but they're not crying like everybody else. Epictetus even talks about this. He says that you can, and still be a perfectly good Stoic, you can commiserate with someone who has just got some bad news, that maybe a business deal that they were working on fell through, or athletically, they just broke their ankle and now they can't compete in that race that they've been training for. Understandably, if they don't think like a Stoic, and even if they do, when that first hit of, we'll say negative circumstance occurs, is going to be upset. And if that's someone that we care about, or just a stranger that we actually want to extend a bit of understanding toward, we can still say, that's horrible. That's devastating. Whatever the words are that they're using. Because otherwise, if we start saying these weird things like, that you can just feel better if you want to, right? This isn't actually a bad thing. Only your character and a loss in your strength of character is bad. Virtue is the only good. Like, that would just come across as, get the hell away from me. That's not what they need at that point. The important thing, however, for ourselves, we can mirror the loss, the grief. Not that we're going to act, but we can be human about it, we'll say. As long as we restrain ourselves just a little bit, or a lot, and remember that sadness, that stress, that fear need not go any deeper into ourselves. As per the title, we're going to live our life, not somebody else's. A few takeaways from this episode. We need to take responsibility for our own experience. As I like to say, there is no authority higher than our own choice, not the circumstances in which we find ourselves or the opinions of others. So even if others try to share or tell us what the truth is, what the correct interpretation of the events is, we don't need to accept that. We need to firsthand or be the driver of our own experience, not the passenger. There may be things that trigger our own neurology so that the brain helpfully says, hey, here's what this means. Now, sometimes that is helpful, but sometimes it isn't. And if we don't want to feel fear because the brain is saying this is the appropriate response here, we can actually make a different choice as to our experience. We can be the driver instead of the passenger. So we're not going to leave it up to the circumstances. We're not going to leave it up to other people. And ultimately, we're not even going to leave it up to what the brain suggests for us. And then we're not going to be weird about it. So even if we have the Stoic strength to create the experience that we want, we're not going to throw that in people's faces when they're going through a hard time. We will have the conscious awareness that we're trying to be a friend to someone, perhaps. And if they're down in the dumps because they lost their job, or they're ill and they're just completely miserable and they're complaining about it. Sure, we might try to help them to not complain and not be as miserable, but we certainly aren't just going to say, hey, why don't you just think like I think, and then your problems are solved. You don't have to feel this way. Hey, why don't you just change your attitude? That isn't necessarily helpful. And if that were the only way that we interacted with others, we would come off as a bit of a weirdo. So have the strength of character to join someone in their experience, but then make sure that you have the strength to realize that that's what you're doing, and that their interpretation of events isn't the truth with a capital T. It's merely an interpretation, and you have the ability and the responsibility to choose something different, something that you prefer. That's the end of another episode of the Fit Stoic podcast. If you like what you heard, please do share it with someone you believe might like it too. This is Corey. Talk to you next time. Whatever your circumstances, operate with excellence.